The light in the Sanctuary of Aeons did not behave like normal light. It did not simply illuminate, it seemed to judge. It dripped from the crystalline arches of the ceiling, pooling in the vast silent spaces between the observer platforms, carrying with it a weight that felt less like physics and more like history. Dr. Aris Thorne felt it on his skin, a cool pressure, a silent inquiry into his own fleeting biology. The silence here wasn't an absence of sound, but the sound of geology, of time itself grinding forward at an unimaginable scale. He could hear the frantic, hurried beat of his own heart, a hummingbird's rhythm in a hall of sleeping mountains. Before him, Arbiter Thale manifested. It wasn't an arrival so much as a slow coalescence, a gathering of light into a form that resembled a great faceted tree of crystal. Thale's consciousness was a slow symphony of light pulsing through its core, the thoughts of a being for whom a human century was a passing breath. To its left, Node Prime 7 of the K'tharr Hegemony was a geometric impossibility of obsidian and cold logic, a being that did not exist so much as it calculated. It had no voice, only a cascade of synthesized tones that translated in Thorne's implant as pure, unfeeling reason. For 3 hours, Thorne had stood in this silent judgment, answering their questions. They were not interrogators, they were auditors reviewing a specimen. "Your species' history," the light of Arbiter Thale sang, the translated thought resonating like singing crystal in Thorne's mind, "is a fever, a chaotic anomaly of self-inflicted violence. 10 millennia of it. We have observed this chaotic signature since your first radio waves pierced the void. It is concerning." Thorne kept his breathing even, his posture relaxed. He had trained for this moment, not with weapons or military strategy, but with anthropology, with empathy. "Arbiter," he replied, his own voice sounding impossibly fragile in the immense chamber, "we do not see it as a fever. We see it as a crucible. The pressure of our own history is what forged us." Node Prime 7's synthesized tones cut through the air, sharp and precise. "Crucibles produce predictable outcomes. Your expansion into the Pandora system is an unpredictable variable. It lies within a buffer zone designated by the Concordance 3 million years before your species achieved sentience. Logically, it constitutes a statistical risk to regional stability, an unacceptable deviation." Thorne felt a familiar, weary sadness. They were so old, so certain. They looked at humanity's frantic, messy history of growth and saw only a flaw, a bug in the galactic code. They could not comprehend that chaos was the engine of adaptation. "Pandora was an unclaimed, dead system when we arrived," Thorne stated calmly. "We followed every Concordance protocol. We terraformed it. We built homes. 15 million human souls now call it home. They are not a statistical risk. They are families." Arbiter Thale's light softened, shifting to a hue of patient condescension, the color of a star explaining gravity to a dust mote. "We appreciate your parental sentiment, but the universe is a delicate structure. Your presence there introduces an element of volatility. The hegemony's logic is sound. For the sake of cosmic harmony and for your own long-term stability, it is the recommendation of this concordance that you withdraw." Thorne looked from the light of the lumen to the cold calculation of the K'tharr. He saw the silent observing Aqueous, Loremaster Olin, whose chromatophore skin rippled with unreadable patterns. They weren't making a threat. Threats were emotional, born of fear, anger. This was something far colder. This was a diagnosis. They had found it cancer in their perfect static garden, and they were prescribing its removal. Thorne thought of the children playing in the parks of Pandora's capital city, under an engineered sky. He thought of the scientists in its labs, the artists in its studios, all the messy, vibrant, unpredictable life that these ancient beings saw as a rounding error. And in that moment, he felt not defiance, but a profound clarity. They saw a flaw, he saw a future. "Your recommendation," Thorne said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of every war fought, every lesson learned, every sacrifice made in humanity's bloody ascent, "is respectfully declined." The light in the chamber did not change, but Thorne felt it. A subtle shift. The patient curiosity of the auditors was gone, replaced by the granite certainty of the surgeons. The tones from Node Prime 7 were flat, final. the deviation will be corrected. And in that geological silence, a decision older than his species was made. A correction would be applied.
The correction was, like all K'tharr endeavors, a model of efficiency. There was no declaration of war, no grand pronouncements. Such things were illogical displays of emotion. There was only a command, issued from Node Prime 7 in the Sanctuary of Aeons to the Hegemony's third Pacification Fleet. The designation was precise. This was not an act of aggression, but of stabilization. The fleet, 64 perfect obsidian vessels, detached from their orbits and folded space, their objective clear. Enforce the Concordance's recommendation upon the anomalous human presence in the Pandora system. The fleet's central command consciousness, Nexus, processed the mission parameters with flawless logic. It analyzed 10 millennia of human history, a data stream overflowing with chaotic variables, tribal warfare, global conflicts, civil insurrections. The conclusion was simple. The humans were volatile, but predictable in their volatility. They would likely offer a disorganized emotional resistance. Perhaps a few of their primitive kinetic ships would launch a futile attack. Or, faced with overwhelming logical superiority, they would broadcast a panicked surrender. Both outcomes were acceptable and had been accounted for in its probability matrices. The journey was a silent, instantaneous transit across the void. But upon arrival at the edge of the Pandora system, Nexus encountered the first illogicality: silence. The chaotic chatter of human subspace communications, their entertainment broadcasts, their public data streams, their network noise, had simply ceased. Nexus allocated 0.8% of its processing power to analyze this. A coordinated system-wide communications blackout was a known military tactic, but for a civilization as young as humanity, achieving such discipline seemed improbable. A more likely scenario, it concluded, was a panic-induced system failure. The fleet advanced, a perfect geometric formation slicing through the system's outer cometary cloud. They passed the orbits where defensive platforms should have been. The platforms were there, inert, their power signatures dormant. They approached the system's primary planet, Pandora Prime, a jewel of blue and green terraforming that Nexus had to admit was impressive for such a chaotic species. No ships rose to meet them. No frantic hails for mercy filled the comms. The planet below hung in the void with the placid indifference of a tomb. Long-range scans began, systematic and absolute. And then the second, more profound illogicality emerged. The data was a paradox. Life signs were abundant, 15 million of them, just as the human delegate had claimed. But they were static, motionless. Technology grids were fully powered, but dormant. The ghost light of empty cities shimmered on the planet's dark side. It was a system simultaneously alive and dead, a photograph of a civilization taken 1 second before it vanished. Nexus devoted 12% of its processing power to this new problem, cross-referencing all known phenomena, exotic energy fields, biological agents, temporal anomalies, all returned negative. The humans were there, their hearts beating, their bodies warm, but their civilization was paused. The fleet held its perfect formation, 64 points of cold logic suspended in an ocean of utter mystery. Every sensor array was now focused, sweeping, searching for the cause, the variable that had been missed. And they found it. A small speck of manufactured matter drifting in the precise geometric center of the system, no bigger than one of the humans' ground vehicles. It was a simple buoy emitting a low-energy signal, a single, repeating pulse that translated through the K'tharr systems as the simple concept, waiting. Nexus calculated the buoy's potential functions: a distress beacon, a navigational marker, a trap. The last option was the most logical, yet the buoy held no discernible weapon systems or energy source capable of threatening even a single K'tharr vessel. It was, by all metrics, insignificant. Yet it was the only thing in this silent system that was active. It was the answer. A vessel was dispatched, its tractor beam locking on to the small object. As the beam made contact, the signal from the buoy changed. The gentle, passive pulse of waiting ceased. A new signal took its place. It was not a surrender. It was not a threat. It was an invitation. The single concept that now pulsed across the silent system was ready.
The concept of ready was an anomaly Nexus could not immediately parse. Ready for what? It was not a known K'tharr state of being. A K'tharr unit simply was, or was not. It performed its function. This human concept implied an anticipation, a tension before action. Logic dictated that the buoy, the source of this illogical signal, must be fully analyzed. But as the K'tharr vessel's tractor beam held the object steady, the buoy did not wait to be dissected. It acted. It transmitted a single, complex data packet, not a virus, not a weaponized code, but a key, an invitation to a secured, isolated network. Against all standard protocols, which advise destroying such an unknown, Nexus's curiosity, a logical flaw it allowed itself in the pursuit of understanding anomalies, compelled it to accept. The key turned, a connection was established, and the main holographic display on the bridge of every K'tharr vessel flickered to life. It showed a perfect, real-time replica of the 64 K'tharr ships, holding their flawless formation in the silent void of Pandora. And then in the simulation, the silence broke. The first attack did not come from the planet or from the dark of space. It came from the asteroid field they had passed through hours ago. Asteroids that Nexus had scanned and dismissed as cold, inert rock. The simulation showed them cracking open, revealing not energy weapons, but massive rods of dense metal, launched by silent, pre-positioned magnetic accelerators hidden on the system's moons. They were pure kinetic weapons, moving at a significant fraction of the speed of light, undetectable until the moment they were already upon the fleet. In the Sanctuary of Aeons, the light from Arbiter Thale pulsed with confusion. On the other side of the hall, Dr. Aris Thorne spoke, his voice calm, almost conversational. "Your first mistake," he said, "was assuming that the most dangerous weapon is one that radiates energy. We learned long ago that the deadliest things in the universe are often cold, silent, and patient." In the simulation, the K'tharr fleet reacted with perfect logical efficiency, adjusting shields and firing interceptors. But as they did, a swarm of small angular human ships surged from the dark side of Pandora Prime. Nexus's combat matrix immediately identified them as the primary threat, and retasked a third of the fleet to engage. But as the K'tharr weapons found their marks, the human ships didn't just explode. They detonated in controlled bursts of exotic particles, creating localized sensor ghosts and micro-distortions in space-time that caused K'tharr targeting solutions to fail catastrophically. They weren't warships, they were sacrificial pawns, designed to cripple the K'thar's greatest asset, their perfect information. "Your second mistake," Thorne's voice echoed in the vast silent chamber, "was believing that logic is the ultimate tool of warfare. It is not. The ultimate tool is understanding your opponent. For 50 years, we have not just been observing you, we have been studying you, your logic, your tactics, your flawless, predictable efficiency." The final phase of the simulated battle was not a fight, it was a disassembly. Human ships, the real warships, emerged from stealth within the planet's upper atmosphere. They moved with the terrifying, fluid chaos that Nexus's predictive algorithms could not model. They didn't target command ships first, as logic would dictate. They targeted engine sections, communication arrays, creating not just damage, but system-wide confusion.
Human battle AI, trained on millennia of human conflicts, didn't just counter K'tharr tactics, it anticipated their logical responses and set traps for them 3 moves ahead. The K'tharr fleet, in the simulation, was dismantled, piece by piece, by an enemy that fought not like a soldier, but like a force of nature. The entire engagement lasted 7 minutes. "You prepared for a conflict," Thorne said, his gaze fixed on the now flickering light of Arbiter Thale. "You failed to understand that for a species forged in 10,000 years of self-immolation, a battle is not won with the first shot. It is won with the first thought. The moment you decided to apply a correction, you had already lost." On the bridge of the K'tharr flagship, the simulation ended. The holographic display went blank, returning to the view of their own fleet, perfectly unharmed, floating in the eerie, silent, and very much alive Pandora system. 64 ships, pristine, and in their collective consciousness, the chilling, absolute certainty of their own annihilation, rendered in perfect detail. They had not been attacked. They had been graded. Thorne let the silence stretch for a long moment, the weight of what he had revealed settling upon the ancient beings before him. "What you and your fleet just witnessed was not a threat," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It was a courtesy, a playback of a battle that was won yesterday. We chose not to make that simulation a reality." He looked directly at the crystalline form of the Arbiter, and then at the cold, calculating geometry of the K'tharr representative. "This is the lesson. There will not be a second."
The silence that followed Thorne's words was a universe away from the one that had greeted him. The first had been the silence of ancient, unshakable certainty. This was the silence of a shattered axiom, the sound of a foundation cracking at the base of reality itself. For the first time in its million-year existence, the crystalline mind of Arbiter Thale was in chaos. Its light, once a steady celestial glow, now fractured into 1,000 warring hues, displaying colors of doubt and raw fear that had not been seen in the Sanctuary for eons. It had judged humanity on a timeline of millennia, but humanity had just demonstrated a mastery of moments, of the terrifyingly brief, decisive seconds in which universes are won and lost. The Arbiter's timelessness had been rendered meaningless. Beside it, the perfect obsidian geometry of Node Prime 7 began to emit a faint high-frequency vibration, a shudder in the very fabric of its being. Its internal processes were trapped in an unending logical loop. Power without application, threat without execution, restraint as the ultimate expression of superiority, paradox, paradox, paradox. It had calculated the humans as a statistical risk, but it had failed to calculate the variable of wisdom born from agony. Dr. Thorne did not move. He did not press his advantage. He stood as a witness, not a victor, his expression one of a profound shared sorrow. He was merely the messenger for a truth his species had paid for in blood and tears. It was not the Lumen or the K'tharr who broke the silence, but the observer, the aqueous, lore master Olin, who had remained a silent pool of shifting patterns, now saw his own patterns resolve into a single clear image projected across his skin for all to see. A question mark. His telepathic voice, for the first time, was not a whisper, but a clear, resonant thought that filled the minds of everyone present. "We have read your history as a chronology of failure, a species climbing out of one self-dug grave only to begin digging another. We were wrong. This terrible discipline, it is not in your historical record. Explain." Thorne gave a slow, somber nod. He raised his hand, and the holographic display that had shown the K'tharr fleet's simulated demise came to life once more, but it showed no warships, no advanced technology. It showed a world of mud and fire. Grainy black and white images of young men in primitive trenches, their eyes wide with a terror that transcended species. Gas clouds rolling over barren fields. "We learned early," Thorne's voice was a low murmur filled with the ghosts of generations, "that courage without reason is just a beautiful name for slaughter. We perfected killing on an industrial scale before we had even learned to leave our own atmosphere." The scene shifted. A silent, terrible mushroom cloud bloomed over a city of paper houses, the faces of physicists, their expressions a mixture of awe and damnation.
We learned that intellect without wisdom is the shortest possible path to annihilation. We gave ourselves the power to unmake our world, and in doing so, we're forced to stare into the abyss of our own nature. The image has changed again. Tense leaders in dark rooms, maps covered in vectors of mutually assured destruction, red phones that must never be answered. For a century, our entire species lived with a gun pointed at its own head. We learned that the greatest victory is the war that is never fought. We mastered the art of the stalemate, of pulling back from the very brink. We made a philosophy of restraint because the only alternative was a final shared oblivion. He paused, and a final image filled the hall. Not of war, but of its aftermath. The signing of the Global Unification Treaty. The hands of former enemies, of every color and creed, clasping over a single document. And after 10,000 years, after turning every conceivable weapon on ourselves, we finally learned the ultimate lesson. The enemy was never the other tribe, the other nation, the other ideology. It was the seductive darkness within our own hearts. We waged the longest, hardest war of all against our own worst instincts. And on the day that treaty was signed, we finally won. The display faded to black. Lore Master Olin's skin, once a swirl of questioning patterns, now held a single steady color of deep, resonant blue, the aqueous symbol for epiphany. The fractured light of Arbiter Thale coalesced, stabilizing into a soft, humble violet, the color of respect. And Node Prime 7, after a final jarring shudder, went perfectly still. The paradox had been solved. A new, terrifyingly vast dataset had been integrated. Wisdom through suffering. Lore Master Olin spoke again, his thought voice soft, filled with a dawning awe. Your history is not a record of failure. It is a scar, and we are only now beginning to understand how strong you must be.
The wound that Lore Master Olin spoke of hung in the air of the sanctuary, a palpable presence. The judgment was over. The audit was complete. What remained was a new, fragile, and profoundly respectful silence. Dr. Aris Thorne was no longer a specimen under review. He was the center of gravity around which the future of the Concordance now turned. He could have dictated terms. He could have demanded reparations, territory, a seat of power. It was what the violent history he had just shared would have predicted. Instead, he offered something else entirely. He began to speak, his voice no longer needing to carry across a gulf of misunderstanding, but now filling a space of shared, somber reflection. You sought to preserve harmony, he said, his gaze sweeping across the three ancient beings. Your goal was not malicious, it was merely incomplete. You built a garden so vast and so peaceful, you forgot the nature of the wild soil from which all life springs. You forgot the struggle. He took a slow breath. For that reason, humanity cannot simply join your concordance. We cannot return to a state of innocence we never knew. We cannot unlearn what is written in our bones, and we cannot join a compact that does not acknowledge the wisdom born from those scars. A new holographic display materialized before him, but it showed no star charts or treaties. It showed a simple, elegant structure, a building of clean lines and open spaces. We do not propose to join you. We propose that you join us in building something new, a new compact, founded not on age or tradition, but on a mutual understanding of the true cost of existence. And at its heart, we will establish this, the Institute for Conflict Philosophy. The light from Arbiter Thale pulsed softly, a silent question. This will not be a war college, Thorne clarified, anticipating the thought. It will not teach you how to build better weapons or devise more efficient tactics. Your logic and your long history have already perfected the art of destruction. No, this will be a place that teaches you why you must never use them. We will share our history, our philosophy, our psychology. We will study the game theory of de-escalation, the societal trauma of war, the precise calculus of mercy.
We will give you our most precious, hard-won treasure, the exhaustive knowledge of our own near extinction, so that you may never have to learn it for yourselves." He concluded, his voice soft but absolute. "We offer you our scars, so that you may remain whole. That is our only term." For a long moment, the sanctuary was still. Then, the synthesized tones of Node Prime 7 sounded, devoid of their earlier certainty, now imbued with a new, complex simplicity. "The proposal is logical. The long-term preservation of galactic stability requires the integration of this new critical dataset. The hegemony accepts." Then, the humble violet light of Arbiter Thale warmed the chamber. "We who have lived in the light for so long have forgotten the lessons of the shadows. The lumen accept. We have much to learn." Finally, the lore master Olin's skin resolved into a complex, beautiful pattern that was the aqueous symbol for a new beginning. A partnership, his thought voice confirmed, speaking for all who had watched in silence. As equals. Thorne offered a slight, formal bow, a simple human gesture of respect. In return, the light of the entire sanctuary seemed to soften. The cold geometry of the K'tharr representative seemed to lose its edge, and the silent observers rippled with a unanimous color of hope. A new age had not been demanded, it had been earned. The message from the buoy in the Pandora system was never meant for the K'tharr fleet alone. It was a message to the galaxy, a story not of power, but of cost, not of superiority, but of survival. Humanity had been put on trial, judged for a history of violence that made them seem young, chaotic, and dangerous. But in the end, it was that very history, that long, brutal crucible that had forged them into something the ageless Concordance could never be: wise. They had not come to the stars to conquer, but to ensure that the mistakes written in the soil of their own world would never be repeated on a galactic scale. Because in the vast, silent library of the universe, the most important stories are not always written in starlight, but are sometimes etched in the scars of those who have survived the fire.